Michael Wojcik with your Our Town-based look at what is going on at the state legislature in St. Paul. There have been some items in the news this week that we're going to touch on. We're going to jump into one of my favorite topics, energy, clean energy, and how we go about getting it. First up, Governor Walz has signed into law a bill honoring Tom Thomasoni, a state senator from the Iron Range. He has been suffering the effects of ALS for some time now, and this will be his last session in the legislature. He sponsored a bill that would provide $20 million in competitive grants for ALS research and another $5 million for those who support those with ALS. This had broad bipartisan support and was signed into law by the governor. Also this week, there was a committee vote on a bill that would provide funds to replace all private lead pipe connections in the state of Minnesota. It's estimated there could be 100,000 of those. This passed the committee with a 17-0 bipartisan support and expects some version of this to become law as part of the bonding package or other legislation this year. With the enormous budget surplus this year, there's a lot of talk of tax cuts and how to return some of those dollars to taxpayers, but a lot of differences in opinions on how you might go about doing that. One item that we don't necessarily think about as much is the property tax that is paid by renters, and there's some discussion in the State House, and there's a bill that would essentially increase the tax credit which is returned to renters. Now these tend to be both lower income individuals, but also they tend to consume less resources because the housing densities tend to be higher. The proposal in the House would return over $800 million to renters over the current biennium. Now, with people paying much higher prices at the gas pump and Putin's war in Ukraine, there's a lot of focus on energy. And one thing that's unique about Minnesota is energy is a topic that's brought us together in a bipartisan manner. Truly, Minnesota's been a leader in many ways. We have some of the best conservation standards in the nation. In addition to that, we were one of the first places that put a hard renewable energy target in place, and it's something that we've been able to meet and exceed along the way. Look for these items to continue. One thing that makes energy particularly important to Minnesota is the traditional forms of energy we do not have. We do not have coal, we do not have oil, we do not have gas. We do not even have uranium to fuel nuclear plants. As such, all the investments that we make in renewable energy are investments that tend to stay here, and as a result, there's been bipartisan support for that. As we deal with the impacts of climate change on our communities and our country, as well as dealing with the very real possibility of not having fuels available from unfriendly countries, we're looking at new ways of creating energy here in Rochester, and the legislature is no different in that regard. There are a number of bills that I found interesting that deal specifically with energy that goes beyond the many things we've already done. In reviewing bills that have been introduced that affect energy locally, there are a few that I found particularly interesting. Minnesota has long not allowed new nuclear power plants to be built, and it's not a perfect source of energy, but it does allow for a creation of a vast amount of carbon-free energy, so it is something of interest. And as you would expect, there are bills in both the House and the Senate that would potentially end that prohibition. It's not a perfect solution, but it's one of the many options that we have. In addition to that, something that was introduced with local authors Dwayne Quam and David Senjum that I found interesting is a study on using nuclear energy to create hydrogen, which is another way of storing and using energy. Locally here, Representative Liebling, and I believe there's a companion bill in the Senate, introduced something for a downtown energy district. And you've heard me talk about this before, but the idea is using a centralized boiler that can be fueled by fossil fuels or other fuels in the future. And what that does is it incredibly efficient, delivers energy to downtown buildings, much the way a traditional steam heating system would, but in a much more efficient way. So it's kind of a way of conserving in high density areas in the community of Rochester. And lastly, really an innovative approach is being looked at by the Prairie Island Indian community. And what they're doing is they're talking about how do they become a net zero community. And there are bills up for discussion that deal specifically with some of the resources to accomplish that. Whatever the solutions are going to be, energy continues to be a huge topic for Rochester and the entire state of Minnesota.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.